Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Masterclass, one of the marquee events of the University of Melbourne's 11th Annual Science Festival as part of National Science Week. My name is Julia and I will be your host for today's Masterclass and all of the Masterclasses happening this week. As a host, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the unceded lands on which we're filming, the Dja Dja Wurrung land people. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders are this country's first scientists with deep and enduring knowledge of the land, waters and skies. I pay my respects to elders, past and present, and I welcome all First Nations people here today. In making this acknowledgement, we commit to respectful and responsible conduct towards all others, to the traditional laws of this land, particularly at times of formal ceremony. Today's event is Burning Lessons from Country, Ancient and New Understanding of Bushfires with Maddison and Trent Penman. And we are coming to you live from our Creswick campus, which is 130 kilometres northwest of Melbourne. The campus is situated on 15 hectares of land with adjacent native and plantation forest and is equipped with analytical, teaching, microscopy and forest industry laboratories. On the screen, you're seeing the Flare Lab, used by researchers here to understand the flammability of native plants as well as building materials to help with the protection of people and property. A very cool part of the research areas here. How today will work. So Maddie and Trent will be giving a 30-minute presentation about their work, and then we will be taking questions from the audience. Then aiming to finish up at 11:30. How is this all going to work? So the chat is disabled today, but to ask a question, all you have to do is put it in the Q&A function. But before we start asking questions, we do want to find out where you are all zooming in from. So please, in the Q&A function, please let us know where you are situated right now. Are you in Melbourne? Are you in Australia? Are you around the world? We often have people coming in from lots of different places all over the world, and it's always amazing to find out. So we've got some Geelong, Nina from Creswick, right here, there you go. Melbourne, Parkville, Summers, Perth, amazing, welcome. A little bit of a time difference there. Yarra Valley, wonderful, welcome. Lots of different people. Amazing. Thanks, everyone. Keep them coming in and we can find out where you're all from. Welcome to everyone. That's it from the introduction. So without further ado, I will pass over to Trent to start things off. Thank you.
Thanks, Julia. Yes, my name's Trent Penman and I'll be talking about some of the new technologies or contemporary technologies and what they can tell us about fire behaviour and fire risk and how we can live with fire in the landscape. And when we think about fire management and trying to understand what we can do and how we can make a difference, there's a whole lot of questions that we have to ask. We need to think about where the fires start, why do they start, when do they stop perhaps. Sometimes we get a lot of ignitions in our landscape, but they don't actually turn into fires. So do we even need to worry about those? Where do fires move to, where do they travel, and what do they do on their journey there? And then what can a fire impact, and what is the cost and benefit of different actions that we have there? And really we want to know is, can we do things better in our landscape so that we can change these fire impacts and get the benefits from fire, which Maddie will talk about more, and reduce the negative impacts. So I'll talk about how we go through some of this process with a few examples that we have. And I want to acknowledge that I'm talking on behalf of quite a large research team working in all different areas here. We have quite a range of people from different countries around the world, all working together to talk about this fire problem. And this was actually a day that we were very privileged to work with Jara on country to learn about some of their burning practices and some of the new practices that they're adopting to manage their country. So one of the first things we have to think about is fire behaviour and where fires might actually start. And so to do this, we actually go out and we collect the litter or the leaves on the ground in the forest. We bring them back into the lab and look at the different moisture components in there. So we all know that wet leaves on a campfire just create smoke, but dry leaves create fire. And we actually need to work out where that level of moisture is to understand where we can predict where fires might occur. So we run experiments at a very small scale here to understand where those moisture thresholds are. And here we have Jane and Bea out in the field actually then running experiments to see if our laboratory experiments around fuel moisture translate into the field. And then that allows us to loop back again and do even more research. Then we can scale that up. Once we understand when fires might occur, we can look at the fire behaviour within an individual fire. And we've been working with farmers around the region here in Western Victoria to understand behaviour of fires when they undertake crop burns. And you can see every now and then we get a little tornado turn up on the edge of the fire there, and we can see the fires coming together. This allows us to take our lab results into the field and then expand those in terms of understanding. And this is an infrared camera shot of when fires come together. And you see in the middle of these fires, when they come together, the fires actually speed up. And we have a very technical term here called the zipper effect. And as they come together, they accelerate and they get faster. Now, this is just in a crop fire, but in a wildfire, when we have two wildfires coming together, this zipper effect can be really destructive. And in 2003, we had two wildfires join on the edge of Canberra, and that's where most of the house loss that was observed in that fire actually occurred. So we're doing experiments so we can better predict fires, and then we can better understand the risk to people and property. For those of you that remember the Black Summer fires about 5 years ago now, we do work using satellites to understand how they spread. And this is some work we did to look at where the fires were at different times. To understand, this is about 1,500 kilometres from bottom to top, so it's quite a large area, and from left to right as well. And these were the 4 fires that were really impacting the area after Christmas. This big one on the south coast of New South Wales over here was the one that resulted in thousands of people evacuating out from these areas. But understanding these big events helps us to better understand what might happen in the future. We also use all this information and put these into computer software packages called fire behaviour simulators, and that we can simulate what happens within an individual fire. This is a pretend fire that we've put together in the Blue Mountains in New South Wales, and we can look at how the fire spreads over different terrain, how embers can start fires in front of that main fire front, and the rates of spread that we get for these bigger fires. And fire management agencies use this information every time there is a fire to position their resources, so where they'll put fire trucks, but also the warnings that you may see that tell you when to evacuate or when to be watching and kicking off your plan. And so this means that when these big events like Black Summer occur, there's a lot more information going into predicting these fires and informing the public about what's going on. And these are just some photos here from Black Summer and the sort of situation that was going on. While it looks calm in the foreground, everybody was actually panicking here, and good information that came through helped this town evacuate at the time. And so that's how we predict one fire, but looking forward into the future, there's a lot of things changing. And here we have a lovely software diagram here, but we've developed a package that tells us about what might happen in fires in the future. So with this software, we are able to predict fires that may occur every day for the next 100 years, where they might spread and what those impacts might be. And this allows us to play games, if you like, of changing the management levers so that we can look at the impact of different management practices on the final outcomes or our risk values here. And it's important to note that we're not just worried about people here, but we're also worried about the environment. And so some of the things we can look at now is this line across the bottom is the fire that we experience. And these graphs just tell us how much more the fire is going up. So areas like the Central Highlands to the northeast of Melbourne, they're going to see a very big increase in the amount of fire that's going to be there. But other areas such as the Grampians to the west of Melbourne, a much drier environment, will see an increase, but it's not as much. So when we start thinking about what we might do into the future and how we might manage fire, we can prioritise those areas that are going to see the biggest change in order to protect people, property, and also the environment. We can also run different scenarios of management like I was talking about, and on this y-axis here is whether they're the best, number 1, or the worst, or a bad idea, number 16. And we've got a bunch of strategies here which we've given not very clever codings. We can test all these different ideas without actually having to put them into practice, and we can identify those that are good. So we have some practices here we know under our current knowledge are a bad idea, and some practices over here that are a good idea, and some in between that we might want to think about refining them. And we can expand the number that we do here. And so this allows managers to start planning for what might be in place in 50 years or 100 years' time. As the science develops, these can be updated as well. So if we look forward, we know we're going to have more fires in the future. The science that we have now is helping us to manage. We know we're going to get more, so we'll have to keep incorporating that as we go. We know at the moment there are good and bad pathways, and these might change. But importantly, these computer models don't tell us everything, and people are key to the conversation. And understanding from our oldest fire managers and those with the most experience, which are Indigenous communities, is absolutely key to this development. And I'll hand over to Maddison Miller to tell us about this issue.
Thanks, Trent. Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. In my language, in the Darug language, Wurrung, thank you so much for joining myself and Trent today to have a yarn about fire. I'm Maddie. I am a Darug woman and a social scientist, which means, I'm also an archaeologist, so that means I like to dig holes, and this is me digging some holes in Pentridge Prison of all places. I like to listen to elders and to country and to learn from deep time, and I really love to find traces of the past. And so for me, as a researcher at the University of Melbourne, that takes me down lots of really interesting paths, and I get to meet lots of really interesting people. I get to spend time with elders, like I'm doing here, up on Tanarong country with Uncle Dave from Wurrung country here in Creswick on beautiful Dja Dja Wurrung country, or Jandak in their language, and I get to really trace what was happening in the landscape, you know, from yesterday until, 65,000 years ago, and finding out all of those different stories that tell us about country. And country is a word you'll hear a lot. I'm going to say country, I don't know, maybe you should keep a tally of how many times I say country, or perhaps your hand will get tired because I'll say it a lot. But we speak about country. Country's been in the news quite a lot, about the welcome to country. But what actually is country, and what does it mean? Importantly, country is not, an equivalency of land or water, but it's actually an entirely different concept. And it's not a geographical sense of country or a geopolitical sense of country. So I've got this definition here, which I'll just read out. And this comes from an anthropologist called Deborah Rose Bird in their book, Nourishing Terrains. And she says, country in Aboriginal English is not only a common noun, but also a proper noun. People talk about country in the same way that they would talk about a person. They speak to country, sing to country, visit country, worry about country, feel sorry for country, and long for country. People say that country knows, hears, smells, takes notice, takes care, is sorry or happy. Country is not generalized or undifferentiated. Rather, country is a living entity with a yesterday, today, and tomorrow, with a consciousness and a will towards life. Because of this richness, country is home and peace, nourishment for the body, mind and spirit, heart's ease. So you can see when we're talking about country, it's not something to be managed or something to be tamed. Country is us. We are country, and we live in this reciprocal relationship with country. And so when we're talking about fire, and Trent's presentation showed us so many damaging fires that we as a society in Australia have come to, live with, sadly, of this idea of catastrophic wildfires, and come to expect them every summer. But that hasn't always been the case. And that's not just from Indigenous knowledges, but the science backs this up as well, that these catastrophic wildfires are a relatively new phenomena on the Australian landscape. And that's because my ancestors, the Darug people from Sydney, the ancestors of the Jarrah people here, and the ancestors of the places where you're all calling in from today, cared for country. And when we're talking about country and caring for country, it's not just this idea that we need to do these things so our houses don't burn down, but a deep sense of obligation. And this comes from the Australian State of Environment report from 2021, where caring for country is described as an obligation and an honour. And in caring for country, Indigenous Australians draw on laws, knowledge and customs that have been inherited from ancestors and ancestral beings to ensure the continued health of lands and seas with which they have a traditional attachment or relationship. This is a reciprocal relationship whereby land is understood to have become wild or sick if not managed by people, and in turn, individuals and communities suffer without a maintained connection to country. It is well understood by Indigenous peoples that if you look after country, country will look after you. And this very simple statement of looking after country and country looking after you is the sort of foundation of Indigenous philosophy when it comes to caring for country. So what happens when we don't care for country? Well, as I said before, we get things like catastrophic wildfire, which leads to the loss of biodiversity, the harm to human health, and noting that in the Black Summer fires that Trent spoke of, it wasn't just direct harm from the fires themselves, but those smokes travelled right across the country. And I remember being in a high-rise in Melbourne, and I couldn't see out the window from the smoke. And some estimates, and this is from the CSIRO, say that something like 450 people died from the Black Summer smoke and the impacts of those fires. And this burning, this harsh burning, creates these cycles of unhealthy country. And this photo here is from my backyard, where I grew up in a place called Kinglake. And this is the aftermath of the Black Saturday fires. And this is a place that I grew up in. This is a gully in which I visited many times, where there were lyrebirds and koalas and possums and just this beautiful abundance. And so to come back to this place and see this, nothing, is harmful not only to that biodiversity, but to the soul. And so, if we're sort of thinking about future fire, which Trent's team thinks about quite a lot, we can think about, is that the future? And what does Indigenous knowledge, what does looking to the past tell us about future fire? And so when we look to Indigenous knowledges, we need to understand that very deeply that these are different ways of knowing, equally valid as Western science, but foundationally quite different. And in fact, from my very biased opinion, Indigenous knowledges are the most successful knowledge modes, because we know scientific knowledge that is 35,000 years old. There are Indigenous stories and songs and dance that exist that tell stories of volcanoes erupting in Western Victoria. And we know those volcanoes erupted some 35,000 years ago. Those stories come from places like Budge Bim, which has been put onto the World Heritage list, and that's from Gunditjmara country. And so these stories, these songs, these artwork, these are all ways to encode this really rich scientific knowledge. And it doesn't just encode fact, but it actually encodes our obligations, how to act, how to respond to these different things that are happening on country. And so they weave together deep time observation, science is nothing if not observation, with social and cultural responsibilities. And so what does that tell us about, how we could act in the future? If we all took scientific knowledge and wove that with our responsibilities, we can act for the future, we can act for country and for biodiversity. And so this is a picture of that exact same place that I took, slightly to the right, but this is that same landscape that burnt in Black Saturday. You can still see those trees are a little bit black. You can see that there's some smoke filtering through the trees as my family do some cool burning on that property. But what our lessons for the future are for Indigenous knowledge is that to heal country, we need to address the past. We need to understand deeply what has happened to country in the past 250 odd years since colonisation, to start to unpack and bring back aspects of healthy country. And so looking to Indigenous knowledge to tell us what to do in the future, we understand that Indigenous knowledge is a blueprint for how we can care for each other and how country can care for us. And this is not only the role of traditional owners. We can't do this alone. This is our shared problem, that we are facing a future of catastrophic wildfires that are only becoming more frequent. We're facing biodiversity loss. And these solutions, I believe, lie in the coming together of Indigenous and Western ways of knowing. Thank you. Julia.
Hello, thank you so much, Maddie. That's why I've grabbed that. Please stay with me, just because we'll start doing some Q&A, and Trent, I'll ask you to come back in. Thank you both of you, so incredible presentations, and so much for, I think, the audience to think about, and a few questions have already started to pop in, so I'll start to fire them at you. But yeah, just call out to everyone, so please send all your questions into the Q&A function. We've got quite a bit of time to be able to ask lots of questions, so we can get into that. While you're thinking of questions, though, I always like to sort of start to give a bit more background. I know Maddie gave a bit of an introduction to your background already, but would love to hear about, I guess, why this area specifically is of interest to you.
Yeah, so I've always been interested in the past. As a kid, grew up in the bush. I loved going out on country and finding traces of the ancestors. And then I think, being 17 when Black Saturday happened, I think that was a real catalyst to thinking, well, this can't be right. This is not how it's supposed to be. This is not only harmful to my friends and family and our loved ones who lost their lives, but this beautiful country that held me and grew me up really. Is not healthy. And so that's when I started to, through going to university and working and meeting people and listening to elders, was sort of starting to understand the complexities of our past and what that means for the future.
Yeah, incredible. What an impactful, I guess, event to have happened in your life, and it really drove a lot of your work. That's amazing. And so Trent, do you want to share a little bit more about your background and I guess, your studies in the past and what led you to being interested in this area?
Yep, I grew up in Sydney, but we were very lucky to live near some forested landscapes, so I spent a lot of time near home, but also near my family's place to the north, spending a lot of time in the forest, and always had a great love of nature. And I worked as a conservation biologist for a while, and of course, if you work in conservation biology in Australia, fire comes in sooner or later, and so I worked more in the fire space, and I got to work with agencies that were managing fire. And I guess I found a pathway which tried to balance the human needs and the conservation needs at the time, because I think without that balance, we don't go anywhere and we just end up arguing about different things. So I've been working more and more in that space, and with the modelling background, or developed the modelling background, gave opportunities. And I must say, I was naive in that way, that it's only through the last few years working with great people like Maddie and others here at the university, the understanding of the role and the complexity of Indigenous caring for country, and how absolutely vital that is to bring that in has come in. So I feel like I've started my career again, but it's a really exciting place to be, to have great people to work with, and to learn and understand this culture that we really should be a fundamental part of our land management. So.
Yeah, absolutely. No,
so
it's
I'm
amazing.
going back to school,
which
is great.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's so great to hear about the careers where the more people you meet and the more knowledge you find out, the more you can sort of spur more of your work and study. So that's incredible. Well, thank you to both of you. So let's get into some questions. I was going to say before, if you do have a question specifically for one presenter, please let us know as well. But otherwise, I'm sure it might be obvious, so who knows. So let's go. So for Trent, to start off with, so what type of bushfire management strategies are being used? What type of bushfire management strategies are being used? Yes.
Good question. There are a lot, and within a strategy we have what we'd say are multiple tools. So prescribed burning is a common one that gets used, and I guess you would see it a lot. Prescribed burning is really just a controlled burn under certain prescriptions, hence the name. So they're used to change the fuel structure to try and modify fire behaviour. And they can be done on large areas, so the biggest ones I think can be up to 10,000 hectares, which is very big. Or they can be done on small areas, like a couple of hectares around properties, really trying to knock the fuels right down. So if a fire impacts those properties, suppression crews can have the best effort. We have other fuel management. We have something called mulching, which is, as it sounds, where we put native vegetation through a mulcher and it just creates a mulch bed on the ground. So again, changing the structure. And there's a few other fuel methods that we have. We also In that suite, we have fire suppression, which is fire trucks and helicopters, and we're seeing a lot of money spent in that space, and perhaps that money could be elsewhere because we know it's about $9 spent in responding to an emergency is only $1 in preparation, or the other way around. So we spend 9 times more on recovering than we do on preparing. Should get my numbers around the right way. But we also have a lot of work with community engagement and community values, and it's probably not the exciting stuff because it doesn't create good fire images. We had some great fire images during the presentations. It doesn't have trucks with flashing lights, but it's so important to have the community aware of fire and prepared for fire in terms of what they're going to do. Because without that, people then, it doesn't matter who you are, you don't make rational decisions in an emergency. So a lot more work in that space. So the more we spend early on, the better. And to go back, we have these great opportunities to work with Indigenous communities, but they haven't really got the strength in funding, certainly in Southern Australia. In Northern Australia, we see more, and I'd let Maddie talk about whether that's enough or not. We see more funding going in that direction, but I have seen in the last 10 years a shift. Again, it's not enough, but it's certainly there. So enabling communities, Indigenous communities, to have self-determination of their land and decide about management actions there. So there's a lot, they're probably the main ones, and there's a lot of little ones that happen as well, but we've only got half an hour.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Did you want to add more to that?
Yeah, I guess from an Indigenous perspective, the goals of Western land, or the dominant land management practices now, which are carried out by land managers like Parks Victoria or other sorts of land managers, and then the goals of Indigenous communities who have control or are able to care for their country are very different in this space. So these ideas of fire suppression, of preparedness for fires, as opposed to caring for country principles, I think are very different goals and can come up with very different outcomes. So I think it's sort of switching the narratives, I think, is one of the big tasks that we have.
Yeah, absolutely. And following on from that, so from Beck, she asked a question about approaches to Indigenous fire management we've spoken about, but I guess in different parts of Australia, are you aware of sort of how it happens in different parts, and I guess how that's also changing as fires become more frequent?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's millions of different ways in which Indigenous people manage fires because it is so dependent on where you're standing and the relationship that you have with that country. So, when I talk to elders about that, it can be so different that we would put fire here where Julia's standing and not here where Trent is standing. That's how fine scale our understanding of, adding fire to the landscape is. So you'll often hear it referred to as things like mosaic burning, but I really like to think about it as responsive burning, that you're responding to what country needs, and the different needs of not only the vegetation but the animals that live there, and what we need as a community. So it is really variable across different parts of Australia. In some parts, you could burn really large parts of country, and that's okay because that's how country is, and it can hold that type of burn. Whereas places, and perhaps in Victoria, where we have really variable landscapes, you're going to have really variable responses to cultural burning. And it's not just burning that we use as a land management tool, or a caring for country tool. We need to think about where water is going and how flows are going out across country. So it's taking into account all of those different things.
So many things to consider. That's amazing. So we've got one from Francesca, no one specifically, but I might go back to you, Trent. So do you believe that cool burning, I think you mentioned it, will start becoming more common practice within our fire management services?
I would like to think so. Yep. But I think we also need to be careful here that cool burning as a cultural practice remains as a cultural practice, and that we don't try and put it forward as the answer to everything. As Maddie's talked about, the landscape has changed so much, and there are places where I've been told by other Indigenous researchers that those management practices can't go in the way it is. So there's other management that needs to bring it across. So about that understanding, I think, yes, we'll see it happening more. It's certainly accelerated in the last 10 years, but accelerating from zero is probably not too hard most of the time. So we're getting a small amount there, but yes, we'll see more, but it's not going to be the only solution to this massive problem that we've created in the last 250 years. So there'll be other things going on as well.
absolutely. Lots of work to do. I might stick with you, Trent. So just pivoting a little bit in terms of combining your teaching and your research. So I guess what subjects do you teach? This is from Taylor, and how does, I guess, that research inform how you're teaching out here at Creswick?
Interesting question. Yes, so the majority of the teaching that I do is in the postgraduate space and the graduate certificate. So it's for either for professionals who want to advance their education or for people who are trying to get a higher degree and specialise. We do also teach a small amount into the undergraduate space. The research we do definitely feeds in, and we try very much with our, as you saw, we have quite a large team, so we bring that expertise and those individuals in to teach as well. The research program tries lots of things, and I think one of the ideas that's out there that is very wrong is that all science is golden. Science is generally about proving things wrong. So a lot of our work doesn't always get to be seen, but it's about building that knowledge base. What we have that's really valuable is the fire lab out here, where we can actually allow students to see fire. And in this time where safety is absolutely paramount, it's not possible to get out and see burns most of the time. The logistical challenges of trying to time a course on the right weather day is just not possible. But be able to get the students to have that hands-on experience with fire and different things burning really triggers a lot of thinking, and that's what we love to see as teachers, is students thinking about things, not just accepting what we say. And we have a great time here with all of our subjects when they come out, and we probably talk for 10 minutes and the students talk for the next 2 hours in asking questions and bouncing off, so it's wonderful to be able to do that. And we learn from our students too. They're all working different spaces and they've all come with different backgrounds, so the idea of just somebody standing at the front and talking is out the window in my mind. It's really about that collective knowledge and building that understanding. Yeah, amazing. That's great. And it was a great question and a good reminder about the combination of teaching and research at the university. It's not just one or the other. Okay, now question for both of you. This is from Remy. So do our current fire management strategies include working with firefighters in prevention rather than for fighting fires, exclusively putting them out? If not, do you think the role of the firefighters should be expanded to include Indigenous fire management, analysis and prevention? Long question. Who wants to tackle that one first? Do you want to start or do you want?
I would say that there is increasingly more Indigenous people in these roles, and traditional owner groups have their own crews of mob going out and doing fire prevention work, firefighting work. So yeah, I think you're seeing more and more people out there actively in the landscape. But again, it takes time. There are new species. In the past 250 years, there's been lots of new species on this landscape. The ways in which our country is comprised have changed. So it's a lot about learning, how do these invasive species or planted species respond to fire. So there is a lot of work happening in this sort of more preventative caring space, but there's still a lot to learn. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think from more the fire agency perspective, they've always spent a lot of money in the prevention work, but the response is always required. And so Australia is quite different from the US, where the US has their prevention and their response budget tied to each other. So if they have lots of fires, they spend it all up on the suppression side and they've got nothing for, on the suppression side, and they've got nothing for prevention, whereas in Australia, these are different funding sources where they come through. So the prevention, all the fuel management works that go on, the community engagement works where we're seeing increasing investment, all these things are funded by fire agencies. And one of the values of these, particularly the burning work, is that it's giving staff exposure to fire and some of those things of how do these different things burn under more mild conditions, so that when they're dealing with wildfires, their training is current and they remember what's happening, and the responding to the landscape is just so important. And it's something, we've moved a lot of staff off field jobs into office jobs, and that experience and that knowledge of what's going on and what's in that gully compared to that gully is really being lost. So I personally would like to see more staff out in the field and less reliance on computer modelling, even though that's where I make my money.
Well, it's good to hear. I mean, that's what the main thing we want to find out. So from Holly, is there a particular state or area in Australia that does fire management particularly well? And what can we learn from them? Are you aware of?
I think every state.
The gold standard. The gold standard. Who do we want to replicate?
Well, there is a healthy competition between West and East Australia, and then Northern Australia always put their hand up and say, you forget about us, because they actually have more fires than anyone else. One of the great things we've had in Australia is, even though we have state-led fire response and fire prevention agencies, is that all the states work together and talk with each other. So what works well in one state can be presented and tested in another state, but because of the differences in the environments, they're not guaranteed. But the agencies are talking together increasingly through formal arrangements and informal arrangements, and they've all recognised that some states have more money than others, and so the states in the better situations are helping the other ones along. So we're in Victoria, so we should say Victoria, and they do have, in terms of risk management, Victoria is probably ahead of the game, with New South Wales a close second. Fire response is so variable in there, and you can't say anyone's better. They've all got different conditions to deal with.
Yeah, I was going to say, it comes back to what we were talking about before in terms of the different environments and what's required for it. Did you have anything else to share?
No,
just agree.
I would say that nobody's better, but nobody's doing it particularly well.
Okay, so we all can have sort of marked improvement. Absolutely. Okay, now a question from Hayden. So what has the Victorian, so back to Victoria, I guess specifically, Victorian logging ban meant for the practice of cultural burning and other land management approaches, if any? Are you aware of how that's affected? Do you want to start with that one?
So I mean, I guess what we're seeing, and I'm not sure if it's a direct result of the logging ban, but what we're seeing more and more is traditional owners taking joint management over state parks and forests, and so we're starting to see the introduction of cool burns or Indigenous burns, cultural burns in these spaces for the first time in 200 years in some of these landscapes. So that's really exciting, and we're also starting to see Indigenous self-determination about what it means to care for country here on Dja Dja Wurrung country, close to where we are. We're seeing the introduction of Galkunya, which is their forest gardening, which is really a holistic approach to caring for forests. And it's really exciting to see the different ways traditional owners are, coming into power, coming into, back into their, I guess, responsibilities of caring for country and the different ways in which they're doing that.
Absolutely. Did you have anything else to?
I guess on a fuel management side, the ban on forestry was a slow shift rather than the rapid shift that may have been portrayed in the media. So the extent of lands being affected by logging is relatively small to the surrounding areas. So there are different fuel management practices that may be in place if that's deemed appropriate, but I don't think it's going to result in major shifts one way or another in terms of consequences, and that's really where we need to be thinking. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, so on to, I guess you've both spoken quite a bit about how we're moving towards, the combination of like incorporating a lot more Indigenous knowledges into fire management practices, which is where we want to be heading. A question from Paul though, has there been, is there any comparison to other Indigenous cultures around the world and their approach to fire management and the connection to their land management? Is there any countries, I guess, that we can aspire to be a bit more like? Are you aware?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of Indigenous connections globally looking at fire management. We've been connecting with communities and scholars in Canada and North America as well. In Canada in particular, and I believe our fire scientists here at the university work with fire scientists in Canada as well, where they have these huge catastrophic wildfires, and so we've been talking with their communities about what that means for them and sharing knowledge, because some of our species have gone overseas. So there's lots of eucalypts in places like California where they have pretty big wildfires, and in other places around the world, and some of their species have come here. So we're sharing that traditional knowledge about how to care for these species, what they respond to fire, and what does it look like for fire in their landscapes and on our landscapes where our species are now intermingled. So that's really interesting, and also working with communities in places like the Arctic, which you might not think of as places of having fires, but certainly, yeah, they happen there, and similar stories of the Indigenous peoples being dispossessed of their lands and moved and I guess colonised. So, sharing those stories about what does it mean to come back into care for country.
Absolutely. Are you talking to some of your colleagues around the world? Is this
Yes.
becoming more popular as well?
It's
prominent, I guess.
It is becoming more prominent, and sadly, the Indigenous communities around the world are being treated terribly, and so they're all dealing with trying to re-establish practice, but also recover from a really traumatic several hundred years. And there was a fascinating group being led by the Food and Agriculture Organisation of the UN that's really trying to drive this and support this and facilitate these discussions. So I think it's absolutely vital that we do it, and it's something that should come up more and more.
Yeah. Hopefully lots of more progress in the area. Thank you for both. Okay, another one for you, Trent. So do you rely more on your lab experiments or field experiments or real fire data to make recommendations for management practices? And that's from Beck.
Good question, Beck.
Good question, Beck.
Very good. We don't rely on any one thing. So where I was saying before that science is about disproving most of the time, or falsification as we say, what we're also looking for is converging lines of evidence. And so if our lab and our field and our wildfire data are all coming together to say the same thing, that gives us confidence in saying it. We always have to make predictions with imperfect knowledge, whether that's for a single fire, at a small scale for 1,000 hectares, we're going to get it wrong, or a wildfire like we had for Black Summer where they were 500,000 hectares. We'll get it wrong, but we have to do with the best information that we have. So the way our team is working is that we have lab experiments that support the field experiments, and sometimes one comes before the other and it varies, and then we try and apply these to wildfires. But it's very hard to get out and measure wildfires during the event because we want to make sure that the suppression crews have access, but we also want to make sure our staff are safe. So wildfire data is very hard to come by, and really we don't want to be in a situation where we've got too much data in that space because that means everything's gone wrong. So we try and bring them all together and then bring those into the computer models so that we can make our best guess really going forward.
Yeah, amazing. So D, all of the above.
Yes.
I believe is the answer. Thanks, Beck. Okay, so turning a little bit more, I guess, to your work and I guess a bit more of the day-to-day. I guess for some of our audience out there might be thinking about wanting to work in this area. So to both of you, maybe I'll start with you, Maddie, just I guess what's a typical day in your work? I know there probably is no typical day, but it's maybe a typical week in terms of the things that you do and what's involved.
Yeah, so my work is really variable, as you can probably tell from my what is my day to day. So I do teach. I'm teaching this semester a course on community engagement as part of ecosystem management. I do that. I also have my research at the moment. One of the projects that I'm working on is around Wurrung, the Yarra River, and about how do we understand Wurrung as a living entity. So working with Wurundjeri and Bunurong on that, working with other traditional owner communities across Australia. So I'm often out somewhere, talking and yarning and learning from elders. I even sometimes get to work overseas, which is really exciting. I just got back from northern Norway, working with the Sami peoples in the Arctic. So, as an academic, your career can really take you many different places, and it's hard to say this is what I do on any one day. There's plenty of time at my desk researching and writing and doing all of those things. But what I really enjoy is the ability that this role gives me to connect to people from students, from communities, from my colleagues. And I think that's where the magic is.
Absolutely. Sounds an incredible variety of things to do. What about yourself, Trent?
Yeah, but similar to Maddie. I guess being in a larger team, I don't get as much time out in the field as I used to. We have the lab side as well, so it's not just running the lab, there's designing the equipment for the lab, and that's a group effort. So we'll often have 4 or 5 of us in there throwing ideas around before we develop it. So, and then you could very quickly go into a meeting about predicting fires for 100 years and thinking about the computer side of it as well. And yeah, like Maddie said, going overseas to engage with other researchers is just so important. Like some of the questions we've already had, we're always learning not just from each other in Australia or just within the university. We've got to go wider, and that's where we grow, and I think that's why we're in academia, because we thrive from those ideas and those connections. And then there's the boring side too. Every job has its admin, but we try and forget about that. But really talking to people and building it. And one of the great things about our roles is we get to work with research students, honours at the end of an undergrad or a master's or a PhD, and working with those students and guiding them through the process and then learning from them. So I always say to our students, particularly in a PhD, at the start of the project, you'll learn a lot from us. At the end of the project, we'll be learning a lot from you. And it's really exciting to see those students come through, and that connection doesn't stop when they graduate. They move on and they become part of your network and your collaborators, and working for government or working in research. And it's a really satisfying part of the job.
No doubt, absolutely. So I guess sticking on your sort of day-to-day job, what would be a recent highlight? I mean, no doubt it is seeing the students succeed. Is there any sort of big ticket highlight moments for you over the last sort of period of your career? And I'm coming to you, Maddie, too, next, so you can have a think about your answer.
I wanted to go second on this one.
Okay.
There's a lot. I guess, not to be outdone by Norway, I recently got to go to a meeting in Rome with FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organisation, and so I had a few days there with Michael Fletcher, another one of the Indigenous researchers here at Melbourne, but also working then with fire management, fire researchers from around the world. And then because I was with Michael, I got to meet many of the Indigenous researchers and hear directly from elders from different groups there. And then I was able to actually see a student and a colleague afterwards in Spain and spend some time with them developing new projects, new connections. And just by chance, there were South American researchers there, and we've now started up a collaboration. So while many people think, oh, it's terrible, you get to go away and you just get to sit in Rome drinking espressos, but we did our fair share of that. But it's those connections and those chance encounters that really spark interest, if you pardon the pun, of the next phase of the research. So I think it comes back to, like Maddie said before, connecting with people and learning is just the highlight for me.
Absolutely. And all the travel, it sounds like it's amazing. So what's sort of a recent highlight for you?
I think, where I'm such a nerd, my brain, and this is not a good nerd thing, my brain immediately went to the day that I had 0 emails in my inbox. That was my career highlight.
Northern Norway, don't worry about it, it's no emails.
But I think, it is a fantastic job. We get lots of opportunities. It's a lot of time that we need to, sit down and put all these wonderful things on paper and publish and share our stories. I think for me, one of the methodologies I use in my research is story creation. So I work with communities and scientists and all types of people, and we weave together knowledges and create stories. And so, I did that in Norway, and we created a poem from our shared experience and our shared connection to rivers. And so, being able to, for me, like a real career highlight, something that makes my heart sing, is being able to bring Indigenous ways of knowing, being and doing into an academic setting, and being able to share that and bring people into that experience.
Yeah, absolutely. It'd be so rewarding.
Yeah, but also inbox 0 is quite good.
Both. Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. Okay, so there's a few more questions coming in, so keep those questions coming in, everyone. So this is, once again, for both of you, from Claire. What are the most impactful things ordinary people, I'll put that in inverted commas, can do in their homes or local area to help care for country and manage wildfires? I don't know who wants to go first for that one.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of things, and I think, I didn't say it, but I should have said it. When you go to a welcome to country ceremony, or you're welcomed onto country, listen really carefully to what's being said, because that is an ancient tradition. In Melbourne, we might call that a tandarum, and in different places we'll call it different things, but it's this ancient sort of way of inviting people in to be in relation with country. And Arnie Joy says it in her children's book, Welcome to Country, which I use as an academic all the time and have referenced in academic papers. But she talks about, when you're most welcome to our lands, but you need to you understand that you have obligations, and you abide by these laws, which is to not take more than you need and to care for country yourself. And so I think, just being guided by that. So, we all have a sphere of influence, whether you live in an apartment or whether you have acreage, all of these different things to be able to care for country. It might be about the plants that you're planting in your garden to invite different species in. I like to plant plants for pollinators because I think they're really cool and they're such a vital part of the health of country. If you live on a bigger property, you might want to think about, the ways in which you're caring for country, and maybe Trent has some ideas about the ways in which you can manage that country for healthy fire as well. But I think, taking that invitation of a welcome to country and really thinking mindfully about whether it's having a little pot plant on your balcony or being able to plant something for a pollinator, I think that's important.
Yeah, absolutely. And some other advice from you?
Maddie gets all the good answers, I think. Or gives all the good answers, I should say. In terms of preparing for wildfire, the easiest one that everyone should do is know what they're going to do during a wildfire. And know what your trigger points are. Waiting till you see flames if you're on an urban fringe or on acreage is too late. But also thinking about it when you go on holidays or when you go for a bushwalk in summer. What are you going to do? How will you know about fire? There's great apps in every state now that give you an alert when there's a fire nearby. But what are you going to do? We all plan, and I've been guilty of this, we plan as if we're going to be at home. Everyone's going to be there. The car will be full of petrol. Everything will be packed and we'll just drive calmly out the road. And that's not the case. We saw in Black Summer, people were evacuating with carloads of stuff and they were taking things they didn't need to take and that sort of thing. So it's most important to protect lives and in that people mostly choose to include their pets in that as well. So if you're not at home and your pets are at home, what are you going to do? If kids are at home or half the home's out, what are you going to do? If you're in an area and you know there's fires around, make sure your car's full of petrol and work out, are you safe? Go to your local fire brigade and ask them. But also preparing for fire is about the 6 months beforehand. It's not about the day of the fire going, oh, there's a fire coming, I'll go out, get up on my roof and clean my gutters. They should be ready before you get there. So lots of different actions you can take, cleaning up your yard in a fuel sense, but we also understand people want to have a balance with the caring for country and having those sorts of things. So I think being prepared to leave is the first step that everyone should take, and then learn really about what you can do beyond that.
Being prepared, absolutely. For all different scenarios, I guess is the big message.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we're running out of time, so we've probably got time for maybe 2 more questions. Quick fire one for both of you. So what's the most surprising thing you've discovered about fire behaviour?
I recently, well, you've probably got lots of things. But I recently heard a story from Walpuri country, which is one of the Dja Dja Wurrung stories, which is there's a documentary called Blood Brothers. If you would like to see how that ceremony plays out, and it's a ceremony about conflict, about 2 people being we're in an argument, and we would go through the ceremony. But the story that surrounds the ceremony is about 2 young boys who go out to hunt wallaby, and they light a fire because that's one of the hunting methodologies where you would light a fire to flush them out of the bush, but they don't light the fire when the conditions are right, and that fire then turns into a catastrophic wildfire that rages for days. And then it creates this big, fire front where this hot air is coming up into the atmosphere and meeting cool air, and it creates a big cloud, which in their language they call milpari, and that brings down water down. And so, that I thought was really cool, that there's these fire behaviours where there's hot and cold air meeting that create these cloud structures, and as part of their ceremony, that is the resolution. So, one of us is hot, one of us is cold, and we create this storm front that then brings the rain down, which nourishes country because it pushes that ash back into the dirt to nourish those plants. And so we would be nourishing our relationship. And so, I thought, that's what an incredible observation that is. Thousands of years old, that's been held in that community and told time and time again. But not only does it tell us about what's happening on country, but it tells us about how do we resolve our issues, our arguments. And so that was something that really blew my mind.
Yeah, that's amazing, a combination of everything. What about yourself? Something surprising?
Probably the surprising thing is how when you focus on fire, everything is related, and just I guess one study or one area can never tell you all the effects, and so that the interaction between all parts of the environment, different parts of society, with people. So it's not just, you can't just do a physical science and say this is the answer to the fire problem. If you want to sit down and study and understand fire, you have to have about 50 people in the room to do it half right. And to do it properly we just don't have enough people in the world. But that's the complexity and that's the fun and engaging in those trade-offs. And we could probably learn from the story that Maddie was talking about there, is that we're not very good at saying who's right and who's wrong, because we're all right. And so, yeah, understanding that, and to me, that's the exciting thing that keeps me going and keeps me coming into work, is understanding these challenges and bringing more of them together so we can move forward. And as I said, learning from the Indigenous communities and listening to them rather than trying to force our ideas is a really interesting part of where things are going now for me, and obviously being part of Australia for much, much longer. So.
Yeah, absolutely. That's incredible. One last thing from both of you. So love to hear just a quick bit of advice. We've had some awesome questions come in, no doubt from a range of different audience members, but what would be your advice to kids interested in science in this particular area? What can they do to sort of get into this particular area?
Read. Experiment. So not everyone likes reading. I was terrible as a reader, and my son is exactly the same, and it drives me crazy. But learning and doing experiments, question things. You don't have to have a lab to do experiments, and go out and question things and examine what goes on. And my kids used to have a little game that said, does it sink? And all they were doing is putting things in a jar of water to see if it sinks. But that's a little experiment that you can do.
Yeah,
you can play around with plants outside. When you're having a fire, a campfire or something, be inquisitive about how different things burn and learn. If you're more interested in designing things, there's all sorts of equipment you can build. Fire is one of these wonderful areas that you can come from, whether it's a pure social science angle, a physical science angle, a health angle, an arts angle. It doesn't really matter. You can come at it from any area. So work to your strengths and your passions and your interest, and follow it. It might take you somewhere completely different.
Yeah,
I used to study frogs and now I work in fire. So
there you go. There you go.
Life takes you in funny ways, but just be inquisitive and open to new things.
Yeah.
Anything extra from you?
Get out on country. Go out and pay attention to what's happening. Keep a little log. What flowers are out? What birds are you seeing? What are you noticing around country? And I guess connecting in that way. And that's a huge part of science is observation and learning how to observe and be quiet and see what's happening.
Yeah, amazing. Great advice from both of you. Amazing talks, and thank you for answering all the questions. This has been really interesting. I'm feeling so grounded just by being a part of all this nature around me as well, and hearing all your answers. So thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for joining us online. The Science Festival Masterclasses will continue to be held throughout the week. And if you do want to attend another session, make sure you head over to the Science Festival website and register, and you'll be sent a link. Tomorrow at 10:30, we have The Secret Life of Sheep, how technology and animal behaviour research are shaping agriculture, and we will be live from the Dookie campus, which is where we're all going to be heading now. So thank you again. Thank you to both of you. Have a great afternoon and have a great National Science Week.